Good morning. I am Frank Gaffney. I'm the president of the Center for Security Policy here in Washington, D.C., and I'm delighted to welcome both those of you here in the room for this roundtable discussion and those of you joining us via our live feed and the internet for what is, as Jeff has just said, a hugely important topic at a most critical time. The President of the United States and his administration engaging quite directly with some of those that are most involved in these acts of jihad, or at least in enabling them. I'm thinking in particular of course, of the Muslim Brotherhood meeting that the State Department had 2 weeks ago. Then there was that being the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, the meeting with the Muslim Brotherhood here in the United States that the President himself participated in at the White House last week. Let me conclude by simply saying that we are, I think, at a moment that my former boss, Ronald Reagan, described aptly when he said, starting back in 1961, that every generation faces an existential threat to freedom. It isn't passed on to our children through the bloodstream. It must be fought for. It must be protected and turned over to them to do the same. Or we will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it was like to live in the United States when men were free. With that, I am exceedingly pleased to be able to introduce as our keynote speaker a former Attorney General of the United States, former distinguished federal judge, former federal prosecutor, a man who has, in all of those capacities, as well as in his post-government service at the moment in the private sector, contributed mightily to the security of our country, former Attorney General Michael Mukasey.
Thank you, Frank. I want to thank Frank Gaffney and the Center for Security Policy for having both the energy and the courage to organize this event, which is entitled briefly a Defeat Jihad Summit. Now, there may be some of you who are used to this town and who've been listening to the rhetoric in this town for the last several years who may be confused about the name of this event. So I will tell you that in current Washington speak, it may be thought of as the meeting to oppose man-caused disasters, workplace violence, and other random events having nothing to do with Islam. Today, of course, it's the Obama administration that's using fuzzy language to try to divert the public away from a stark reality, which is that the violence that's being perpetrated in the name of Islam and the stealth cultural attack that's being pressed to advance the goals of Islam, which include imposing Sharia, a repressive and misogynistic doctrine, both have a basis in Islam, and that until Muslims figure out how to deal with that in a way that allows them to live in peace and tolerance with the rest of us are going to have to take whatever measures we can, including both clear thinking and force when necessary, to fight back. But saying that our government has to tread carefully in matters of religion is not the same as saying that you have to permit people who are the enemies of your way of life to decide what you can do and what you can say, or that it's wise to enhance the credibility of those people and their stature within the Muslim world, particularly within the Muslim world in America, in the United States, by welcoming them to the halls and councils of government, or that you should not do all that you can to strengthen the hand of people who are in fact your friends.
Frank mentioned the trial that I had the privilege of prosecuting before Judge Mukasey now 20 years ago, and I was joking with Brian Kennedy as we both came up in the elevator this morning over the fact that we're still talking about exactly the same thing 20 years later. I at that point, I think, said that we hadn't made any progress, but what I'd really like to talk about today is 20 years of regression. because I think that's really what the history as unfolded demonstrates. There's three dimensions to the challenge that we're dealing with. There is a legal aspect to it, a military aspect, and a cultural aspect. And I think we have regressed on every front because we never took up the cultural challenge in the first place. We originally regarded radical Islam in the United States as a legal matter. That's how I got involved in it. That's how we dealt with it at the beginning. We eventually, I think too late in time, but eventually realized that we were dealing with more of a national security challenge in terms of the violent jihadist aspect of it. But we really never took on the ideology that fuels the threat against us, and as a result, I think we've gone backwards on each dimension. In the four corners of our trial, we got to prove that what we were dealing with was militant Muslims whose ideology is taken directly from Scripture, who are animated by revered figures in Islam, and who carried out threats, carried out terrorist strikes for that reason. We also learned that their ideology was a lot more mainstream than we would like to think.
Good morning to all of you, and thanks for allowing me to speak here for just a couple of minutes. As a matter of fact, I've just come from the Capitol Hill Club, where I met with a group of conservative lawmakers there that are asking questions about what's important about this authorization for the use of military force that the Obama administration will probably drop today. And you know, part of my answer to them was an authorization for the use of military force is meaningless unless you know who your enemy is. And this administration has demonstrated that they are unwilling to acknowledge and recognize who the enemy really is. The reality is, if they come in with an AUMF today that focuses on the destruction of ISIS and ignores all the rest of the global jihadist network that we are up against, then I think that it is a mistake to even support it. Because the reality is our enemy is a global enemy. Since really, with the exception of the first Gulf War, we haven't had a strategy to win since the 6th of June, 1944, when they came across the beaches of Normandy. And that was all out, and we were going to win that one. And we knew who the enemy was. Today, the administration refuses to acknowledge that this is a global jihad network that is motivated by the tenets of Islam. When we rushed in and armed and equipped people that were jihadists in the very beginning, folks like Frank Gaffney and John Guandolo and others could tell you those are jihadists. But we armed them and equipped them anyhow, and then we got it all back. And my concern is that now we're off on this in this direction of arming and equipping Islamic groups in Syria. And it will result in exactly the same thing. Ultimately, they're going to use those arms and equipment to kill Christians and Jews, and we are going to pay a heavy price for this repeated pattern of arming and equipping these Islamic groups that are motivated to want to kill us and to establish this caliphate.